Hello everybody, welcome back to From the Depths. Um, as you may have saw in my community posts, there was a bit of a delay on this video, as with Discord's recent change, we're more or less migrating to different service if possible. Other than that though, this episode will be slightly different from the rest, as this one will focus on aircraft before we move on to the next batch. Anyway, let's get into it. First up here, we have one that I showed off in one of the other videos, and that is the biplane. Just pause it here so we can get a better look at it. It's fairly compact. I've kept it pretty simple as a plane goes. Most of this structure is just as it is structure, but it also has like fuel tanks and munitions and stuff inside of it, and then a simple gimbal tracker for viewing. And then it has a bit of an engine on the front here. I believe it's a 6-cylinder. No, it's a 9-cylinder engine on the front of this one. It goes at about 64 meters a second, which is pretty slow as planes go, but it's supposed to be like a cheapo biplane you can easily output. It's got some little landing gear here that I made. The wheels are actually rubber, so if it does actually hit the ground at all, the rubber should indent it. It has a landing skid on the back. Decent tailplane. It's completely made out of wood except for the engine layer, so it's not very good against, you know, enemy fire hitting it. But the whole point is this is a cheap biplane, not meant to engage with most targets. Weapons-wise, it's only got 2 of these long old small missiles that are packed with incendiary and explosives. Against wooden ships, it's fairly effective. Let me just show off the weapons firing. But against anything other than that, only marginally effective. Attacking my own dock, but meh. It did alright. It does alright in most circumstances. However, that is it for the biplanes. Move on to the next one. The next aircraft, there's going to be a lot of ones that'll stick with the same biplane design, but multiple of them are me messing with the engine, changing the structure, or changing out the weapons. Here we have the biplane mod EX-S. It's the experimental C variant. It's got a much heavier engine here with, I believe, a 6-cylinder with still a 9-cylinder, but it just has triple injectors on either side. It still maintains a pretty similar speed to the other one. Not that one, I'm done with you. Go away. It maintains a pretty similar speed. It has some differences to the fuselage, and the landing gear is much, much longer, along with the landing skid. The wings are more or less the same. It still runs with the simple gimbal tracker on the front there. Engine nacelle is a little bit longer and a little bit more complex when it comes to the exhaust. However, instead of the twin missiles, this one has a singular torpedo that it launches. It skids towards the target and then blows up. It's as simple as torpedo can get. So if I launch it, normally it wouldn't launch it from this height, but it's just a normal torpedo. Hits into the water and then travels for its distance. Normally the torpedo sonar would lock onto a target so that it would zoom up and hit it or whatever, but there's no valid target, so it can't hit anything at the moment. Overall, it performs okay. It still has the same problem as the last one, in which it really can't take a hit. But the torpedoes themselves deal pretty decent damage. They deal about 13,000 HE damage, so it works for the most part. Other than that, though, this is the EXS. The next one on the list here is the biplane, just Mod S. Just like I showed you on the last one, that was the EXS. It is slightly different, mainly engine changes. This one has the shorter landing gear and the shorter landing skid. Still has the gimbal tracker. A bit more simple of an engine, albeit I believe I tanked it up quite a bit more on this one. It doesn't have the injectors. This one does go slightly faster than either of them, though, at about 67 meters a second. its diving. However, its normal cruise speed is about the same as the rest, which is what I was trying to improve. I was trying to improve the speed. I'm not very knowledgeable on making aircraft in this game, so most of my stuff turns out to be pretty slow. I also started messing with these side blocks and then using these as struts here to just kind of give it that biplane look, which I think it succeeds at for the most part, but later I'll have done better at it, as this was my first attempt making the struts look somewhat nice. Other than that, though, there's not much changes from the others, so let's... Oh, I should probably tell you real quick. The damage on the torpedo is about the same at 13,686. Other than that, though, let's move on to the next one. Next up, we take a short step back to the biplane designs. This one's much chunkier. I was trying to make more room for fuel tanks and stuff to make them better protected. Turned out kind of dopey, but I did improve on the strut design, where I actually used mimic blocks as I finally figured out how they worked. It's faster than the older biplanes, going about 78, 79-ish on average. It uses a single bottom-mounted gimbal tracker rather than the cockpit-mounted one, as this one is slightly different in the form of it is not a missile ship. It is, or ship missile plane. It is a light bomber. It uses a cram cannon as its primary source of armament. It has about, give or take, let's finish letting it load here, 3,100 kinetic damage with an AP of 5.7 and 8,000 HE damage. It's just a single one that drops and then it hits the target, blows it up. It also has a detonator fuse, so when it hits the ocean surface, it'll just detonate. Try to hit some smaller targets, as this thing's not meant to engage stuff like submarines. The engine is quite a bit more compact on this one than the other ones, as I figured out how to get them to be fairly potent despite being smaller. Both via a lot of radiators and via some strategically placed injectors. This entire back section is the reason it's extended like this is just to hold all the stuff for the cram to make it more effective. So far from my testing, it gets shot down pretty often, but that's usually just because the enemy shells will either go up through here and kill the AI, or it'll hit the bomb bay itself and destroy it, which I'm like, that's fair, it is a weak point. But that is the light bomber. Let's move on to the next one. Next up, we finally have one that's moving away from the biplane design. We have the assault plane. That's all I went with for the name of it. It has a big old prop, and it goes about 86 at max generally. And it carries some fuel tanks on the wings. It's a monoplane design. I made it fairly compact. Again, just single gimbal tracker for viewing. Quite a fat engine overall compared to some of the other ones I've done. I believe it's like a 4, there's like 6 down here, and then I think there's like another 6 up there, so it's like a 12 cylinder that also has a couple injectors coming out of the nose. It's mostly all to give it enough thrust to use it, but this propeller isn't even using all of it, so I don't know why I did that, but it's me not really understanding how aircraft work in this game. For weapons, it has these 2 medium missiles that are both loaded with just explosives. They do about 10,000 HE damage. Not as much as a torpedo, but it's still potent against most of the targets. This one was made during my land campaign. I've been playing mainly as a test, and it works fine against any lighter, medium tanks. Anything that's dedicated to AA, though, this thing doesn't fare the best. It can still hit targets, and it can take some hits, as the bottom of it is armored. Most of the rest, though, is still wood, though, to keep it nice and light. That is the assault plane. Let's go on to the next one. This next one is quite a bit uglier than the last ones. This is my twin-engine assault craft. I originally was going to make this into a bomber, but I didn't really know how crams worked at the time, so I was trying to use missiles as a pseudo-bomb, and for anybody who plays From the Depths in the audience, they know missiles don't really work well as bombs. Unless they're like magnet ones you drop directly over them. Whereas you hit them with cram, and it'll just direct impact them. It uses 2 of these engines here. They're fairly compact, but it uses 1 on both sides with a propeller on either side. It gets decent speed, about 82 meters a second, which is okay. For vision, it has a, if I turn my flashlight off here, again, a gimbal tracker. And it actually has a more spacious hull, so you can actually be inside of it, unlike the other ones where there is no room for a player to stand. Armament-wise, it has 5 of these medium missiles, 1 down the center line and 4 between the 2 wings. They are just explosive warheads with some reinforced bodies. They only do about 9,500 HE damage each, but you have 5 of them, so it's fine. The other armament it has is a MG on the back. It is a twin-barreled 20mm defensive MG, so if a target is following behind its twin-tail boom, it can retaliate. From what I've seen, that gun, while it has a very limited firing arc, it also is pretty effective against lighter targets. Just fire the missiles. They fire at a short delay, so then they won't collide with each other. You can see them all going there. The speed's okay. Max distance is okay. Nothing really wrong with it. Besides the fact that since it's all wood, and it's also just running off of props, it's pretty slow, and it can't deal with larger, more flak-equipped targets. It also only flies at this lower altitude. I don't know if that's just something that happened when I was building it, or whether that was, you know, just a skill issue on the AI on my part. As, again, I am not the most experienced when it comes to making aircraft. Or not, though. Let's move on to the next one. This next one we have here is built off a similar chassis where I adapted it, as later I figured out how the cram bombers work. This one carries 4 bomb bays on board. I changed up the fuselage quite a bit on this one, and I think it came out looking nicer than the previous one. Besides the tail section, I still have no idea how to make a decent looking tail. Again, 2 engines, bit stronger, goes about 89 to 90 meters a second, which is decently fast for something that's just running on propellers. Weapons-wise, again, it has the 4 cram bomb bays that are shooting for about 1,500 kinetic damage, 4.4 AP, and about 5,000 explosive damage, but that's for every one of these, so while the AP doesn't increase per bomb, the HE output is a bit higher than the other light bombers one. It's about 20,000, maybe 25, maybe a little lower than that. I'm not very good at math, but it's about 20,000 damage worth of HE. It also has a laser rangefinder at the bottom for its front armament, which is a small nose-mounted 50mm cannon. This is more meant for the land campaign than the sea campaign for the gun on the front. As during the sea campaign, that gun on the front is basically pointless. Most stuff's heavily armored. 50mm won't be enough to pen most of the heavier ships, and the fire rate's not worth it, as even if you pen, you're going to hit another wall of armor. In the land campaign, however, I found that having a small extra cannon with AP rounds can sometimes disable not even smaller, just can sometimes disable tanks, as the overall build size of those land vehicles is smaller than the boats. From my experience, the shell has gone through sides of tanks I've designed, which I will go into in a later video. Pins in the side and does internal damage, as you'd expect. That's why I have the laser rangefinders, so then it's more accurate. Let me just give you a fire demonstration. It's not very fast firing, but I was taking inspiration from the Duck from World War II, the HS-129. It's basically just a 50mm cannon that'll shoot targets. I've used a Mimic to make this look a little bit nicer, as the normal design looked gross. I believe it is on an AA mount, so it can aim fairly low. About to there. It's either on an AA or an Omni mount. I can't remember which at the moment. Omni mount. So it can't aim all the way down, but it still can aim down and up to a reasonable degree on the front of the aircraft, which also helps in case you're fighting enemy aircraft, and you still have that 50mm to shoot at them with, albeit this thing is not really made for dogfighting. As it is not made for dogfighting, instead of having that big old top turret from the last one that didn't really have that good of a vision sight, on the back we have a singular 18mm machine gun in the tail. This one is on an AA mount, so it can aim much lower than the other ones. Which also leads to when it's buzzing over targets to bomb them, the back machine gun will engage the target. Pretty decent fire rate overall. It's firing at about 913 RPM, which is pretty good. Since it's only 18mm, the actual damage on target is fairly lacking, but the whole point of this thing is to shoot down enemy aircraft that are chasing it. So, other gun craft that are also prone to missing. And then I'll show off the crams real quick. These ones don't have the surface fuse, so they can go down and hit submarines if we manage to get it on. Armor-wise, mainly wood. There's some exposed bits of that front cannon there, but that's just due to the size limitations. You hear the explosion of the crams there. The crams are overall pretty effective when they hit the target. It's just when they hit the target. Bottom of the craft is mostly metal, and then some metal plates on the back gun because, again, space requirements. I was out of space. Engines are a bit bulkier, as I said before. Albeit, I do like these designs versus the other design. It seems a bit sleeker for some reason. Again, no idea what the hell I'm doing with the tail. It's there. It works for the most part. I haven't had issues with it. The only thing I've had issues with is getting shot down, but again, that's because it's mainly wood, and so whenever a shell enters and hits any of these bomb bays, it'll just detonate the whole craft because that is the way crams work. Other than that, though, let's move on to the next design. Next up, we have my first attempt at using a jet. It has these massive jet engines, big ol' wings, and a snazzy looking cockpit, and a much better looking tail than the rest. It's definitely ugly. It goes like about 140-ish meters a second, which ain't the best, but it's okay. Weapon-wise, it contains these large missiles that are pretty short. They deal about 28,000 on impact, though, so it works out for the most part. When they hit targets, it's pretty lethal. The only problems I've run into is this thing sometimes just likes to randomly go to space. I don't know what causes it. It just decides I'm going to space and then never comes back down again. Holds about 14,000 materials, so it can do long-distance missions. Its missiles are very expensive, so they take a while to reload. Overall, from me using it, it's performed okay. It can get shredded by, anything with dedicated flak, and due to the large size of its missiles, after it fires that first volley, it takes a long time for you to reload again. Other than that, though, let's move on to the next one. I don't have much more on this one. Next up, we have a fairly reasonable design. This one I call the Early Combat Jet. I made it much smaller than the other one and just used a single big jet engine going down the center line of the craft. It has 4 missiles, 2 on either side of these explosive missiles. They would do about 12,000 damage each. It has 4 of them. It has a laser rangefinder on the front for its front cannon. Its front cannon is a 23mm that fires at 797 rounds per minute in a burnt gun configuration. The idea being that'll give it the ability to both gun run armored targets, but also be able to dogfight. It's not as fast as that much bigger one, at only about 90 meters a second. But, its gun honestly acts more like a shotgun. I don't know how people do the chain gun capabilities of this, but at the same time, it fires very quickly and it shreds light armored targets. Overall, when testing, this thing has performed fine. It's just when targets are above it in altitude, it struggles. I don't know if that's just because I don't have enough ability to climb or what's going on with that, as all of my control surfaces are all buried under the wings. So there's plenty of control surfaces, but I don't know why it can't climb very well. I'm assuming maybe weight, but I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have one that I think looks nicer until you start looking closer. At a distance, it looks like it's just a blue canopied jet, but then when you get closer, it's quite a bit uglier. On the front, it has these twin-barreled 23mm cannons, firing at about 199 RPM. These are for engaging armored targets on the ground, as this one was made to engage ground targets. It also has 4 medium missiles. These ones all have a little bit of an incendiary warhead in them, but not much. They only do about 5,000 HE each, but they also will fire incendiary, so they burn apart wooden targets and lightly armored targets. The thruster is encased in a metal housing to better protect it against enemy fire. Its survivability seems to be better than the early combat jet because the engine can't be directly hit except for in very specific areas. Overall, it performs fine. It's faster than the early combat jet at about 140-ish. So it maintains the speed of that much larger big missile jet. It's alright. Again, it's another one of me not really knowing how to do them, but trying anyway. However, that is it for this one. Let's move on to the next one. So lastly here, we have the assault bomber slash jet assault bomber. It's a pretty large craft, as you can tell. It has, weaponry-wise, it has 2 large missiles on either wing. Well, one large missile on either wing, rather. Each does about 64,000 damage, so it punches hard when it comes to those missiles. It has 2 of these 30mm 617 RPM turrets, one on the top, one on the bottom, both for rear defense. Bottom defense, upper defense, and with the bottom one strafing targets on the ground that are, following it. It is driven by 2 of these big old turbines. It works for the most part. Still have no idea what I'm doing. Max speed's about 120. And then for the last bit of the weaponry, we have these cram bomb chutes. There's a bunch of them. There's incendiary every other slot. So from here you can go 4,000 explosive and 2,000 kinetic to then a 2,000 kinetic, 2,000 explosive, and 6,000 fire fuel with 20 intensity. When it hits targets with those bombs, it's very effective. It flies at a moderate altitude. Survivability-wise, it's kind of mid, to be honest. It's just because of these huge wings. They get hit, and then there's big holes in the wings, or it hits the rear compartment near the turrets, and that knocks the turrets off. The turrets are on these spinal mounts just to give them a little bit of extra space back here so I could store more materials back here. There's 2 armored hatches back here that contain materials. This is so then if the materials get hit, the craft as a whole will survive, as this is heavy armor. We have the bomb bay with all the pellets for the crams. And then we have the AI, which is protected by a little bit of EMP protection. And then the main visual, which is this visual camera on the front, 360. It has an armored ring around it to protect it against shells, usually light caliber shells. Still struggles against stuff like cram, but that's fine. Tail section doesn't look that great, but the rest of it looks pretty good. I especially like how the cockpit turned out. It's mostly made out of light alloy for most of the craft. However, there are some spots like on the wings that are full of actual metal to both give it some weight to hold it down, but also to provide some additional armor. I was going to armor more parts of the fuselage itself, but then the weight started getting out of control and that dropped the speed further, and this thing is already pretty slow for a jet. I was also tempted to put a turret on the bottom of the front, but it would be too small, or it would get in the way of the bomb chutes dropping explosives, as the front turret would target it, and then the turrets would not be able to get a lock. Other than that, though, this will be the last one for today. If you'd like to see more, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. If you'd like to see me play any other games that you have previously seen on my channel, let me know in the comments. Other than that, though, that'll be all for today. Have a good one.